Hello, I'm Alex Metricardi, Chief Marketing and Public Relations Officer at Living Branches, and today is Friday, October 9th. Welcome to another edition of our weekly video chats. I'm here with Ed Brubaker, Living Branches President and CEO. Ed, something looks a little different about us today.
Yeah, what is it? Is it Halloween or what's going on?
I wish
you have
it
a mask
was.
on.
So do you.
Oh, yeah, I guess I do.
And the reason that we do is because we are going to have a visitor in our taping very shortly. And so we need to take the very most stringent precautions that we can. But first, I want to start with an update on where we are with some recent testing, because we have had positive cases, previous positive cases, at Harmony House at Dock Woods campus, and then also at the Willows of Living Branches. So Ed, do you want to give us a quick update where we are?
Yeah, and I think the thing to keep in mind too is in both cases it was one case. In the case of Harmony House, it was a staff member who actually was symptomatic. At the Willows, it was a resident who was not symptomatic. And so the testing revealed that no further persons were positive, meaning positive for coronavirus. So that was a very positive news. But we still needed to go through the process of the 14 days and the multiple tests and that kind of thing. And so we're pleased that we're beyond that at Harmony House, and now I believe in step 2 of reopening, and we're getting ready for the second round of testing next week, which would prepare us for getting out of the 14-day period as well. So it's a challenge, but it was positive news in that it was contained, if you will.
Yeah, that's very good news. And as always, for the most up-to-date information, be sure to check our website at livingbranches.org.
Well, this afternoon, we're very pleased to have Jim Gutluski here from, well, you work at a lot of different campuses, I believe, but maybe first, Jim, you could just introduce yourself a bit to the viewers so they know who you are and where you work and what your role is within Living Branches.
Yes, I'm Jim Gutluski. I work for Living Branches primarily at Dock Woods. I do pick up shifts also at Silent Mennonite Home and at Dock Meadows. But primarily, and I've been working started at Dock Woods, been there about 3.5 years now.
Mm-hmm. Great. And you did something that we have all done on many occasions, and that calling the Willows Dock Meadows, right?
Oh yeah,
and
so, that's how I know.
That's right. It's been one of those things that we all do it. I can't even tell you how many times I've done that. But we really appreciate you being here today, but also appreciate your work in our facilities, all campuses, and the good work that you do for our residents and the care that you show them. Well, one of the reasons you are here is probably a reason that you would have preferred not to go through, or a reality that you would prefer not to go through. But you actually had contracted coronavirus, and that was back in May, is that correct?
End of May and early June.
End of May and early June. And so one of the things to have you on today was we wanted to hear about your experience and what you experienced as far as symptoms. You were hospitalized, you were in the ICU at one point, never on a vent, but just maybe talk about your experience and some of the symptoms you had, and then how that eventually took you to the point of saying, I think I may need to go to the hospital.
Oh, actually, I never got to that point. My family got to that point, and I just was taken along. Yeah, when this whole thing started, I was in Kenya in like February when we started hearing vague reports of this whole thing starting. And I was on my way on the eve of coming home in March, my mom messaged me and said, you tend to downplay these things and not take them very seriously, but this is getting serious and you need to be careful. And it was a direct flight from Nairobi to New York, which at the time had no cases, so that was just fine. And I was able to come back to work. And at that point, we were just starting to implement incrementally the precautions that were deemed necessary as we went along. And we were doing pretty well for a couple of weeks. We didn't have any cases. And then the first case that we had at Dock Woods, I was working with the resident the day he showed symptoms, and in my mind, I wasn't even thinking that, because at that point in time, we had new residents who were quarantined on one side of the hallway, and the long-term residents, which was the one who had the symptoms, was on the other side of the hallway. And even in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I'm wearing a mask to protect these guys, and I'm wearing all the other garb to protect me from them. So it's kind of a shock that the resident who got sick first was not really expected. And in fact, they even looked at my calendar, and I'd worked with them like 12 days before. And briefly, I was concerned, like, well, maybe I'm the asymptomatic carrier. Maybe I brought this in here. And then I kind of realized, well, no, they didn't have it at Siderton or Willows where I'd been working. So I was okay, so I'm not like patient zero here or whatever. So, but then as the thing developed further, and we had some challenges with the PPE that everybody had, and also the protocols of what to wear and when to wear it for whom. And as more and more residents tested positive, like, okay, well, this person tested positive today. I worked with them 8 or 9 times over the previous 2 weeks or 14 days. So I was exposed, and I'm thinking, to me, it had always been, as a kid, I was sick at times, but as an adult, I'd been, tremendously healthy, my whole adult life, and kind of think like, kind of almost immune to everything. So I'm thinking at this point, I know I've been exposed to people, so either I've had an asymptomatic case already, or I've been exposed to enough antibodies, I'm building up an immunity to it. So either way, I'm not getting it. It's gonna bypass me. And so when it was a couple of weeks. So it was like the end of May. So it was after a couple of weeks again. Maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks of working with people that we knew were positive, and that we were positive before we were treating them as positive. So okay, this is going to pass over me. And then when I got the symptoms, it started off as first a real warm day, and I was like having chills and shaking, and everybody around me was like what's wrong with you? Why are you so cold? And then I took my temperature, and it was 99.5, and then like an hour later, it was like 101 something, and at one point it even got up to 104.5, and even then, I had broke out in a bad sweat. It resolved, and I'm thinking, well, this is over. That's the final, the immune system's final battle against this thing, and it's passed, and it was just beginning really at that point. So I was sick at home for a week with it, quarantining in the basement, and got my test result on a Friday. On Saturday, my family wanted me to call my doctor. I called them, and they said there was, if you go to the ER, they're just going to send you home anyway. So we didn't do it. But then the next day, and I hadn't even noticed, all I'm having is like this fever, chills. Unbeknownst to me, I was apparently showing signs of being hypoxic and short of breath, and my family called the doctor back again, and that's when they said, go to the ER. So.
Wow, and then you went to the ER, and then did they admit you from the ER into
the
hospital?
It was, again, like my first overnight hospitalization ever in my life, so it was kind of a shock. And then even some of the staff that were questioning why I was admitted, and the one nurse pointed out, well, he's got a pulse ox of 91% on 6 liters of oxygen, which is not good. So,
Right.
So yeah, I definitely needed to be there at that point.
So what kind of treatment did they give you while you were in the hospital? And at one point you also went into the ICU, I believe.
Yes, yeah. Initially they said, well, you got pneumonia, and they gave me 2 IV antibiotics the first night. I'm thinking but it's a virus. So why and then I guess to treat what they thought was like the pneumonia. But then the next morning they put me on the high flow oxygen, which I'd never even, in my professional career, I'd never even encountered anybody utilizing that. So it was my first experience with that. Like I said, it's kind of like being waterboarded through your nose continuously, but it did improve or manage the symptoms long enough for the body to take over and for the other treatments to take effect. They gave me the remdesivir. I had about three doses of that.
Okay.
And then they said they stopped the antibiotics, thinking they said it's mostly inflammation. So I said, well, if it's inflammation, they should probably be doing like a steroid. And I think a day or two later, they started giving me the IV Solumedrol, which is like a steroid, which then throws your blood sugars out of whack. And I was like, well, that's not going to happen to me. No, it happened to me. And then they gradually turned down, they scaled down the oxygen. But even after I was in the ICU, there was a couple times where they had to crank it up before they took it off.
Okay.
So I was on it for about 3 days, I think.
Okay. And you never needed to go on a ventilator then, correct?
No, it's not on a vent, just on that oxygen. Then they took that off, and I think I went from that to regular oxygen to room air pretty quickly after that.
So as you reflect on your experience, I mean, and I remember when you were in the hospital and it was a point of conversation at CRT, and you at this point have been our most seriously ill staff member. And frankly, we were quite concerned, and many people praying and thinking of you during that time. And so it was distressing, and I'm sure it was for you as well, very much so. But as you think about your experience, how do you kind of reflect on that and learnings from that? Were there things that you say, wow, that was an aha moment for you? Anything like that, or just some reflections as to that experience and how it has or impacted you in various ways?
Well, one thing I would say was I was kind of shocked the one morning when I got a text from Ed Brubaker, the guy that owns Living Branches, because I was in contact with Nick, and that was sort of expected, but I was surprised to get your message, and I think it speaks to kind of how the type of organization that this is that we're working for. As far as the other things, no, I guess kind of a realization like, wow, this is for a brief time, like, gee, I might not pull through this thing, and then, right. But other than that, not really, and I can't really think of as far as things that I would have done differently, or that it's just one of those mysteries of this disease that we just don't really understand yet.
Exactly.
Some people get sicker. I mean, we had a lot of residents who are in their 80s and 90s who had tested positive and never really showed any significant symptoms.
Yeah, exactly. And so it does, as you say, impact different people in pretty substantially different ways. And yeah, I know it was a concerning time, and I'm glad you connected with reaching out to other people within Living Branches as well. And we really are glad that you pulled through that, and we're able to describe some of your experiences, because it's, I think, helpful for people to know that. But I think you also reflected that clearly we were learning in these early stages too, and we know more today than we did back in the times when you were first experiencing this. And so that's a positive thing, and we continue to work at those things and learn. Yeah, and I know that you were also at the Willows, and so we now had the resident who had tested positive there. Fortunately, nobody else had tested positive, and so I know you were testing negative from there as well. But it shows that one person can really create a situation where we have to lock down, and it's a pretty significant reality. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Jim. I really appreciate you taking the time today, sharing a bit of your experience. But frankly, most of all, we are glad that you pulled through this and that you're doing better. I know before the interview, you were indicating that you feel well and don't seemingly have any residual symptoms, and so we're very, very
nothing
pleased
that I
with
could really notice. It did take maybe another 2 weeks after leaving the hospital to really kind of feel back to 100% or close to that. The one thing I would maybe add, as far as like our staff and the degree of seriousness that we place on this, is that like if we work in a factory or an office, well, your coworkers, your community is just your coworkers. But we have a dual community, that we've got our coworkers, but then we've also got our residents who are, to some degree or another, part of a vulnerable population, and that we need to take into account the decisions that we make, how often we go to the grocery store or stop in the Wawa to use the ATM or go to Home Depot. Each time we're doing that, we're kind of putting our head out of the foxhole and exposing ourselves to risk, which then we bring that risk into our dual community of coworkers and residents, and that we just sort of need to be mindful of the choices that we're making and the impact that those, like you said, one person tests positive, it has a ripple effect on that whole community.
Yeah. Now that's an excellent point. The thought about how our actions impact those we work with, and clearly our clients, if you work in a factory and are making a car, well, you're not going to give the car coronavirus, but we could give coronavirus to our residents. And so that idea of staying safe and being aware is very important. I appreciate that point. Yeah. Well, thank you again, Jim.
Okay.
Really appreciate your time here today.
All right,
and
thanks.
wish you all the best. And
Thank
I'm
you.
very glad that you're doing better. Thank you.
I'm glad we were able to talk with Jim. I have been wondering what his experience was like.
Yeah, it was very good to hear his perspectives. And here's a person that went through it himself. And yeah, it was good to hear, and certainly most gratifying is that he was able to pull through it. In particular, too, didn't ever have to go on a ventilator as well.
We have been, and it was wonderful that he had a positive outcome. We have someone else who did not have a positive outcome.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and we have been speaking about this from time to time to keep this person in people's prayers, and I know Mark and his family were hoping for a miracle. But Mark Snavely, who is our director of residential living on our Souderton campus, he and a number of members of his family became ill with COVID. And there's not a connection to Living Branches, meaning where they acquired it, but, and so he was quarantining post-vacation. And unfortunately, he had 3 family members actually in the hospital in the ICU. And his wife, who was most substantially impacted by it, actually very sad to say that she passed away toward the end of September, and her visitation time was just this past Monday. And I was able to get there toward the end of the visitation time, and it was just a sobering reminder that this is a serious disease, and we celebrate the ones that have come through it, but the reality is not everyone does. And so our hearts go out to Mark and his family. It's a very sad time, and a reminder that we are not through to the other side of this yet, and we need to take it seriously. We need to wear our masks in public, and we need to physically distance, and we need to do those things that keep us safe. But yeah, that was a very, very sad situation.
I know from the emails that I've been getting this past week that, for family members and from almost all of our residents, people are just sick of this. They're tired of being apart. They're tired of the masks. They're tired of having to think about things that you once just took for granted. But I think about what happened to Mark's family, and that is just the reminder, I think, that in some ways we all have to pay attention to, that no matter how much we want this to be over and just go away, that's not the reality that we're living in.
Yeah, that's right. And we can hope and pray, frankly, all we want, but until it's over, it's not over. And we need to be aware of that. And yeah, I'd love this to be over as well, but it's not. And we talked about Harmony House and the Willows, and I call it the power of one. One person, one positive test can set us back in our visitation and all those things. And so we absolutely want to allow more freedom, but we need to do it within a safety zone, because one positive test can dramatically change the course. And I'm not saying it will result in serious illness or death, but the point is, it changes the dynamics, and we need to close down and go through testing, and the logistics and the cost of that are substantial. So we need to figure out a way to live within this and be patient and be caring for each other as we keep going through this.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we were able to have Jim come in. Thank you for taking the time today to do this. Just a reminder to folks that we are now filming these videos every other week. So we will be back in 2 weeks with another video. And in the meantime, if you have questions, please feel free to send them to coronavirusquestions@livingbranches.org. Thank you.